Welcome back to another Python series, but this one is going to be a little bit bigger than the last ones we've done in the past. I hope everyone is having a wonderful weekend. We actually got some good news in San Diego this week. We are allowed to reopen to a certain degree starting Monday. So we're going to be allowed to have indoor dining again. You can actually go to the movie theater again. It's going to be a lot of fun. So it'll be interesting to see. So I'm excited. All right. So what are we talking about? Well, this is going to be kind of the kickoff to what I would call is just a continuing series where we're going to start exploring different topics on the Microsoft Azure platform. Now, Microsoft Azure is a cloud computing platform, and it's a pretty extensive cloud computing platform. There are a wide range of services that you can subscribe to. There are different products that you are able to use, and each one of those products and services kind of have their own little nuances that you have to know in order to use them. So naturally, when you want to kind of get familiar with Microsoft Azure, I kind of force people to just take a project. And so we've been collecting data in the last couple series from different data sources. We've had some that we took from financial news sources. We have some from the SEC. We have some from government agencies. I mean, you name it, we've definitely started collecting a bunch of data. And so what we're going to start doing is we're going to start taking that data and we're going to be leveraging Microsoft Azure to not only store and transform this data, but ideally we would like to take it and do some different types of analysis, whether that's ranging from trying to predict maybe stock prices or company values to doing sentiment analysis on different types of topics. So this is really going to be just kind of a broad series, and there's going to be a lot of different services that we're going to have to tap into. But before we actually do any of that, we really have to spend some time just going over what is Microsoft Azure. I mean, as much as I would love to just jump in and start spinning up some services, I'm really doing you all a disservice if I do that. And that's simply because getting up and running in Azure can actually take a little bit of time. So I don't want you to necessarily think it's just going to be you click one button and you're good to go. I mean, there's actually a few different types of steps that you would have to do. So this first video, what we're going to be doing is more covering what is Microsoft Azure and how do we think about the cloud computing world in a sense. Now, I do have a repository on my GitHub that does contain a lot of information for those of you who are interested. I would recommend you take a look. But if you go to my GitHub repo name, you will see there is a repository called Azure SQL Data Project. This is going to be the main project for at least the data portion that we will be using. So anything related to using different Azure services, any of the code that I write is more than likely going to be stored here. If any of that changes at any point, I will gladly post it on Facebook or YouTube or wherever it needs to be posted, but I will keep you updated. If you do go into this repository, you will see there is a samples folder. There's actually this weird little pipeline one. I'll explain what that is in a second. And then in the samples folder, you will see there's different topics. So some is actually sample code. So for example, how to use particular clients and how you would do certain things and things like that. And then there's some queries. So if you want to see examples of what queries would look like, it's in there as well. And then additionally, there's this resources folder. So the resources folder is probably going to be your best friend in the beginning because it's going to just have my notes that I've kind of aggregated over the time and some additional resources that I have found online, and then just taking bits and pieces from each of them to kind of make this master source of information that I was able to find. So I think it's helpful. I mean, most of it I didn't write. I mean, there's only kind of a few parts that I really wrote, but I found that the resources were really helpful. And I think if you're coming from a background where Microsoft Azure is new to you, I would recommend that you kind of explore some of these resources and then some of the resources that I'm going to lay out to you when we go through our little presentation. Alrighty, so one in here, I would say, I mean, you don't need the cloud provider ones. I would say the Microsoft Azure account one, how to create a free account. This is going to be an important one for those of you who do not currently have a Microsoft Azure account. The nice thing about Azure is they do offer a free account for new users. So I personally did this service when I started using them, and it's nice. They offer you some services and products for free for a certain time period, and they also give you credits to use those services so you can actually leverage the functionality inside of them. Additionally, I do want to keep in mind, I want you to keep in mind that this is not free forever. Well, some are, but I would say most are not. So do keep in mind this is only temporary. It's just kind of for those of you who want to explore it and maybe see what is some of the products and services that they offer. So we will go through this when we get here, but I just wanted to make sure that all of you were aware that there are some resources I'm going to start posting here. And ideally, if you'd like just kind of more in-depth detail, it would be there. And then I'm going to also start doing a nice little presentation. So let's jump into the presentation because this is where the fun begins. Ooh. Where do I go? From beginning. There we go. All right. Microsoft Azure introduction. Okay, so what is cloud computing? We hear this term a lot, especially when we hear about companies like Google Cloud, AWS, Salesforce, Microsoft Azure. So what is cloud computing? Well, this is actually a definition taken from Microsoft. Cloud computing is the delivery of computing services ranging from storage, analytics, networking, and much more over the internet, i.e. cloud. So whenever you hear cloud computing, you just got to think internet computing in a sense. But the idea behind cloud computing is that if you want computing services, maybe that's things like storing data in a database or maybe running some analysis, what you can do is you can buy or rent those services over the internet. So you would go onto your web browser and say, hey, I have this data set and I want to crunch some numbers, but I don't technically have the hardware to do the computations that I want to do. So what you could do is you could say, hey, here's my data set. I'm going to upload it into the cloud, and then the cloud's going to do all its fancy computations, and then it's going to spit back something to you. So the idea behind it is that you get access to services that you might not have available on your own system, but the trade-off is you have to purchase those services. So it's really powerful. It really has ushered in, I would say, kind of this new age of when you're thinking about companies and how they manage their IT departments. I mean, it's really changed the game because there's a lot of benefits to doing cloud computing. What are some of those cloud computing benefits? Well, these are all from the website. So this is honestly, I think Microsoft just did a good job. So I just took it and I think it does a pretty good job for the most part. Additionally, there are some resource links if you'd like to visit them yourself. One of the biggest things is cost. So one challenge that a lot of companies faced probably 20 years ago was every time they would grow as a company, they would have to invest in the physical hardware necessary to run their IT departments. And so that has a cost to it, right? You got to buy the servers. You then also have to usually hire somebody to maintain and make sure those servers are secure. You have to make sure your servers are up to date and things like that. And that all costs money. And so for a lot of small startups, that's a lot of money they don't have. And they really want to make sure that they're using all their dollars as efficiently as possible. So for a very small company, purchasing these large servers doesn't make a lot of sense. And in some cases, even for medium-sized companies, it doesn't make sense for that company to maintain all the physical hardware necessary. That's why cloud computing really kind of took off from one aspect was the idea that you don't have to maintain any of that hardware. You don't have to maintain any of the patches or the updates. You simply rent that service. You rent that hardware by, saying, hey, I want to create a database on, the cloud, but the one who's actually doing the maintenance aspect of it is the actual cloud provider. So someone like Microsoft. So anytime there's an update, Microsoft does it. Anytime has to be maintenance done, Microsoft does it. You don't have to incur that cost. So naturally, what you'll see is it's actually a lot cheaper sometimes to buy that service on the cloud than maintaining all the hardware necessary yourself. So one of probably the biggest benefits is cost. The next one is speed. So the nice thing about cloud computing is it doesn't take that much effort to get a particular service up and running. Now, if I had to do a lot of these services on my local system, it would probably take me a little bit. In some cases, it could take me a day or two or even longer, depending on the complexity of the service. With Microsoft Azure and other cloud providers, you simply either use a user interface or you send along programmatically a request to spin up a service. And that service usually will just be up and running within a few minutes. That is remarkable. A lot of times, that would take me an awful amount of time. And other people as well would experience this long time. Then you have to make sure it works, and you have to make sure that works, and then this works. So it's something that is extraordinarily beneficial, is this idea that I can get any service I want up and running within a few minutes. Truly a powerful feature of cloud computing. The next one is global scale. The other probably huge benefit of cloud computing is this ability to scale. What does that mean? Well, we know that sometimes applications can be a little bit more active during different time periods. So, for example, there might be certain periods, say on your application that you created as a company, and you need to be able to scale up the amount of maybe servers that are running or being able to handle more requests as they come in. Well, cloud computing gives you that capability to dynamically scale up and down depending on different activity levels. That's really powerful because, again, you're still able to operate as that large company, but you can level down when necessary, but not have to maintain all the extra hardware that you technically would have to if you wanted to do it on site yourself. So it's very powerful, this idea of being able to scale up and down and vertical or horizontal as well. So one of the great benefits of cloud computing is being able to dynamically scale, or what they call scale elastically. Productivity. So again, setting up hardware, it takes a lot of time. It's not something that you just do really quickly. It does take time. So what the nice thing is, because you don't have to maintain any of that, you can focus on really what is core to your business. If your business is getting customers to sell products to, you really don't want to spend a ton of time trying to get servers up and running. You want your IT team to help you get your operations where you can effectively sell products to customers. So being able, again, to not have to maintain all of that stuff is really important because it gives your IT team the time necessary to do the things that are really relevant to your business. Performance. Oh, yes, performance is a good one. So, one of the great things about using cloud computing is you get the latest and greatest a lot of the time. So, what that means is if you want to be on the latest version of a SQL Server database, you can just provision that particular version of it. If you want to get the latest and greatest of certain machine learning algorithms, well, that's great. You can just tap into that service using cloud computing. Why is that beneficial? Well, imagine you're a small company and you want to integrate artificial intelligence and maybe to some of your products. That's really hard to do if you don't have the data necessary to train your models. So while you're collecting data and growing your business, you still want to be able to integrate those services to make a great user experience, but you don't have it at that time. Well, what you can do is you can leverage the models of both Google, Microsoft, and other cloud providers to integrate those capabilities immediately. And then as time goes on, you can start integrating it for you, your own company. Additionally, there's certain computation benefits that you can get from a cloud computing platform. So being able to use efficient hardware, being able to use different types of processors and things like that is great because it allows you to crunch the numbers that you need to crunch efficiently, and you're getting basically high level performance, even though you technically weren't able to necessarily do that on your own. Another big benefit is reliability. They make backups of your data. They make sure that if one data center goes down, you don't lose access to your service. So this is where you see redundancy built into cloud computing, where it's spreading out all that information, doing backups and things like that. So if something does happen, you don't lose all of your information. That's probably crucial to me, at least, is this idea that there is this reliability aspect that makes sure your services are safe and the data that you have stored there is safe as well. And then on top of that is security. So security is definitely a big one This is being able to make sure that the people who need to access your services can, and the ones who aren't supposed to don't. So there are many different security services that are offered by cloud computing platforms that make sure that your data is secure and making sure that you get up-to-date security patches, and then additionally just getting different types of services to help maintain your firewalls and then also certain security procedures. So really, there's just a ton of benefits when it comes to using cloud computing. So these are just some of the really big ones. I'm sure you could list more, but it's really changed the game for a lot of companies, especially for smaller companies. Okay, so cloud providers. Well, we've talked about cloud computing. What is a cloud provider? So a cloud provider is responsible for the physical hardware required to execute your work and for keeping it up to date. The computing services offered tend to vary by cloud provider. However, typically they include things like compute power, so things like Linux servers or web applications used for computation and processing tasks, storage, such as files and databases, networking, such as secure connections between the cloud provider and your company, analytics, so such as visualizing data and things like dashboarding, even certain things like data transformation. A lot of different services can be provided, but technically we tend to look at them in these kind of bucket categories. So who are some examples of cloud providers? Well, you obviously have Microsoft Azure, because that's the one we're talking about. There is Amazon Web Services, so AWS, and then Google Cloud. That's another big one. We have Salesforce, and there's actually quite a lot of other ones, but those are kind of just the bigger ones. I know IBM offers certain services as well. I think that those are really kind of the bigger ones. I'm trying to think of like another really big one. I don't think ServiceNow is maybe it is. In certain regards, I guess you can kind of technically argue it is. But yeah, so that's basically the idea of a cloud provider. They're the ones who are offering or basically providing you the computing services, but they are also the ones who are maintaining the physical hardware. So that's really important because you don't have to. Okay, so what is Azure then? Well, Microsoft Azure is an ever expanding set of cloud services to help your organization meet your business challenges. It's the freedom to build, manage, and deploy applications on a massive global network using your favorite tools and frameworks. Does that sound like a sales pitch? Well, it is a sales pitch. It came directly from their website, but if you want the definition, there's your definition. So there's kind of these key components that Microsoft Azure really kind of offers to sell itself. And one big one is being future ready. So one thing is that, you always get the latest and greatest. They're always constantly adding new services, making those services better. So by using Azure, what you're basically getting is that latest and greatest technology. And then additionally, build on your terms. So they have an open source policy, and they also support many different languages. I mean, that's one part when we get there, you're going to kind of go, whoa. But it's really nice, honestly. It's this idea that here's a platform, you can use it however you want. Here's many different tools that allow you to use it. And each one of those tools still gives you the same exact functionality. So it's pretty powerful. The idea that I can use their services using C#, Java, oh God, Python, like 5 other ones. I don't even know off the top of my head, but you can use multiple languages. You have a REST API, you have this, you have that. You've got a command line interface. It's just, there's tons of different tools that allow you to build different services with whatever tool you want to use. Another one is operate hybrid seamlessly. So on premises, in the cloud, and at the edge will meet you where you are. Integrate and manage your environments with services designed for hybrid cloud. So basically they offer different types of cloud. There's private, hybrid, and there's public cloud. So one idea with hybrid is that it's kind of provisioned, so no one else can access it besides you, and things like that. So it's really designed for this enterprise individual who needs a lot of different things to kind of meet their unique needs. And then probably the biggest one that they push is trust your cloud. So get security from the ground up, backed by a team of experts in proactive compliance, trusted by enterprises, governments, and startups. So probably one of the most interesting aspects about Microsoft that it took me a while to catch on to it was they're basically certified for almost everything. I mean, everything they do, they can work with governments, they can work with education, they can work with the military. A lot of their products, if you follow certain protocols, you basically can get access to certain certifications on their behalf in a sense. So that's probably one of the most interesting things about Microsoft is that there is such an integration of their services and products across governments, the private sector, and so on that you kind of get an edge in that regard because most of all their products are compliant if you follow certain protocols. So it's pretty neat that again you can kind of take your products and stuff, and as long as you kind of follow certain protocols, you can actually integrate that to maybe even potentially governments and stuff like that. So pretty cool, I think. We're not going to talk about this part. That's for the next part. Okay, so at this point, I think I'm going to cut off the video because it's been more than long enough. So in our next video, what we are going to do, now that we at least have a high-level overview about what is Microsoft Azure, we are now going to then create an account. So we're going to create a Microsoft Azure account in our next video. And then once we have that Microsoft Azure account, we're going to take a step back and we're going to go back to our presentation and we're going to start talking a little bit about some data services. And once we have at least a high-level overview of what those data services are, we are going to spin up some of those services. So we're going to show you how to spin up at least the SQL database first, and then we're going to start writing some of the code to interact and manage that SQL database. And then we'll probably go into the Cosmos database. So that's kind of more of like a document database. And then we'll probably after that go into a data warehouse. And so there might be some additions beyond that. I'm just trying to give at least a path or a timeline of what we should be expecting to cover. There's going to be a couple things in this series where you're going to kind of going like, why are you doing a SQL database? But then at the same time, you're going to be doing a document database. Doesn't that seem redundant and repetitive? It is. It's actually really redundant and repetitive. But a big part of this series is I want to show you doing the same thing different ways and kind of explain why one way might be better than another one. And then showing, hey, now that we have some of these services, how would we integrate them into other services? So yeah, it might seem a little bit redundant, but trust me, I want to give you as many samples as possible. I want to show you to do things many different ways. I don't want to necessarily restrict you and say, well, you have to do it that way because that's the way I chose to do it. You're going to find a lot of times it really just depends on the project that you're working with. So if you have any final questions, by all means, put them down below. Otherwise, we will see you in the next video.